Valentine's Day is supposed to be a day of romance and connecting with that special someone in your life, right? But this year for me, I had a date not with my beautiful wife, but instead with a surgeon for an emergency procedure. This is the story of the death and burial of my gallbladder. It served me well for 51 years, but alas, as they say, all good things must come to an end. And so this was the case for my beloved gallbladder. I'm Jeff Ash, certified nutritionist, personal trainer, intuitive eating coach, and now gallbladderless. And you're listening to the Men's Intuition Podcast. So yes, this episode is all about my gallbladder, but it's not just about my gallbladder. It's actually about what I'm learning through the process and what I'm planning to do to go forward. And also, there are a couple of points I wanted to talk about related to intuitive eating that I think are important in this conversation. So to give you some background here, here's what happened this last week. So Monday, the day before Valentine's Day, I was having some stomach pain throughout the day. I'd only eaten breakfast. That was really the only meal I'd had because my stomach was bothering me. And that's very unusual for me. I never really have stomach discomfort or anything like that. And so it was getting progressively worse throughout the day. And as it was getting worse, I had a strong suspicion as to what the problem was. And that's because last year I had a CT scan done of my back. And when they did that CT scan, they said, hey, nothing's wrong with your back, but we did notice that you have a ton of gallstones. Those were the words that the doctor used. So he said, hey, you may never have an issue with them, or it just may pop up as a problem out of the blue with no warning. And so at that time, they didn't do anything about it because I wasn't having any symptoms. But it was something that was certainly in the back of my mind, thinking, okay, at some point, I think this may end up being an issue, and I'll certainly be aware of when I feel those symptoms coming on, then I'll know what it is and that I likely need to go do something about it. So anyway, Monday, sure enough, having these symptoms, classic symptoms of gallbladder problems. And so I went to the ER Monday night, and they did a scan, verified that I do in fact have a ton of gallstones and had some in some places in the gallbladder that could have been problematic and nothing major, but that was probably contributing to it. And they said, probably the best thing is to put you in the hospital overnight, let you talk to a surgeon, see if they want to take it out. And sure enough, the next day, the surgeon said, yeah, we need to get your gallbladder out. He said, it's going to be a problem. If I don't take it out, you're going to be back here another time anyway. And so I said, might as well. I've got 2 cruises coming up, one in the end of May and another in June to Alaska with our moms. My wife and I are taking our moms to Alaska, totally unrelated. But anyway, I thought, hey, this is perfect timing, right? It gives me plenty of time to recover before those cruises. So let's get this sucker out, because I certainly didn't want to put it off and then have it happen on one of those cruises. That would be a real bummer. So anyway, took it out. And now I am recovering. And so this experience brought up a couple of important things that I'd like to talk about briefly in this episode. A couple of things that might be helpful to some of you now as you may be navigating some of these kinds of health issues, or when, and I emphasize when, you encounter some kind of health issue in the future, because health issues are not things that we as humans get to just sort of avoid unless we die young before we have any of those issues. At some point, we're all going to experience various health issues. So the first is a point that I want to make very clear, and that is that medical problems come in all sizes and shapes of bodies. Our wellness culture, our diet culture, fitness content, all that stuff implicitly or really explicitly in many cases tells us that we have far more control over the health of our bodies than we actually do. This whole idea of food is medicine and that kind of thing, where we're given the idea that, all we have to do is just eat the right combination of foods, do these certain things, and then we won't have any of these health issues. We're told celery juice will cure basically every ailment, and apple cider vinegar, and we're all of these different kinds of things we're constantly bombarded with, and given the idea that we have far more control over our health than we really do. Now, I'm not saying that lifestyle is not an important factor in our health. It absolutely is, and there are certain things that we can do to reduce our risk of developing certain kinds of conditions or increase our risk of developing certain kinds of conditions. Smoking as a very obvious example is one of those things that can definitely contribute to problems with your lungs and those kinds of things. But nutrition and physical activity can play a powerful role in maintaining or improving certain aspects of our health. But as I've talked about on numerous occasions, there's so much more to health than that also includes our emotional, psychological, social, and economic facets. And this is really where things like stress reduction, adequate sleep, social connection, positive work environment, enjoyable hobbies, how we eat over and above the specifics of what we eat. That's a kind of a big one that I think gets overlooked. All kinds of other things that come into play and contribute to whole person health, really. So let's get back to my gallbladder here. So we're not really sure what causes gallstones exactly, but in a lot of cases, it seems to be related to cholesterol levels. And the most common gallstones are hardened concentrated cholesterol. So this would kind of make sense that it was related in some degree to the amount of cholesterol in our body. Now, I happen to have higher cholesterol due to genetics. I actually take statins to control mine due to a strong family history of cardiovascular disease. And while I'm in a smaller body and I eat relatively well, when you look at the nutrition guidelines, I'm sort of, I'm pretty good with that, pretty much in alignment with that for the most part. I'm very active and all of those kinds of things. So, I kind of, quote, do the right things in general on paper. And yet I'm still at this greater risk of these issues. And as I pointed out, I have cholesterol, one of the several different things that I'm going to be talking about here. My dad had it as well, and he also had gallstones. And so it's quite possible that I really was just kind of destined to have this issue at some point. Now, there's nothing that we know about gallstones that I've done to kind of put myself at risk. And yet here I am, smaller body, active, eating relatively well, as I pointed out. And so we have these kinds of issues, and we shouldn't be beating ourselves up for having a problem like this. So much is outside our control, but even if there is, or there was an action or lifestyle factor that may have contributed to an issue, it's still not helpful to beat ourselves up or shame ourselves, but instead just kind of think about, what can we do now to move forward with this hand that we've been dealt, right? You may be especially prone to this reaction if you're in a larger body, because body size tends to be a target for the medical community in so many cases, and obviously for diet culture and wellness culture. It's not to say that it has no impact on our health. I mean, I don't think that would be a good thing, a good position to hold, because I think the research is pretty clear that it certainly does play a role. It is a factor. But so often it's the immediate target without considering other possible contributing factors. There's so much more that is outside our control than we might think. And, maybe I did something that I'm unaware of that contributed to me developing gallstones. I don't know. Maybe based on my genetics, some certain combination of things that I've done has led me to the issue. Maybe had I started my statin, in my 30s instead of in my 50s, I would have had, I wouldn't have had that higher cholesterol in my system for as long and would have avoided this. I don't know. I really don't. And I don't think there's any way for anybody to know. And there's just too many factors. The body's far too complex. And even if there was an explanation, it's not going to be helpful for me where I'm at now, right? I've got to deal with where I'm at now. The little troublemaker is dead and gone. And now I just need to kind of move forward with what I do have available to me. So, it's kind of like my sleep apnea. If you're unaware, I've talked about this in some social media content, and I have talked about it on the podcast here, but I have sleep apnea, and it's another thing completely out of my control. When I told a number of people that I have sleep apnea, they were actually quite surprised. I even had some say, "Oh, wow, I only thought fat people could get that, or bigger people." And those were the typical responses that I would hear. And no, it's just the way my body is built. And interestingly, some research suggests that around 20% of people with a normal BMI, so kind of in that range that is considered by wellness standards to be kind of the ideal body range, that they have sleep apnea. And in a lot of cases, I think it goes undiagnosed because of the stigma around it, because of the association with sleep apnea and body size. And, fun little fact here, other research shows that those with obstructive sleep apnea and a smaller body tend to be the least compliant when it comes to using their CPAP machines. I use a CPAP myself. And I think that likely comes right back to that stigma and the shame that's so common around different medical issues like sleep apnea, high cholesterol, diabetes, those kinds of things. And interestingly enough, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea back probably in 2008, 2009, something like that. And I used a CPAP for a while. And then in 2010, my first wife passed away. And so I was single again. And, I was ready to start dating and looking for, a spouse in the future. And one of the things that came up to me was that stigmatization of a CPAP machine. And I thought, oh man, my sleep apnea is mild from what they say. So, I don't really need to use this. I don't want to use this. And, when I start meeting people and then, once I get married, I don't want to be sleeping with this, surprise, look at this machine I get to sleep with. So I had all this stigmatization around it in my head. So I went from 2010 or 11, I can't remember when I stopped using it, but until just this year, or last year, 2022, the end of 2022, not using this machine that would have improved my sleep because of that dumb stigmatization that I had in my head. So anyway, that's just a little personal example of how that kind of thing can negatively impact us and impact our health making decisions, things that would have benefited me. The same thing as avoiding doctor visits and, those kinds of things. The other thing I thought I'd talk about too a little is how I'll be approaching my diet going forward, which is especially important to me as an intuitive eater for sure. There are some things that I'm going to need to watch out for. Recommendations lists a lot of different foods to avoid and various habits and those kinds of things. Things like eat small, frequent meals so you have less to digest at a time. Avoid high-fat foods like fried foods, fatty meat, cream-based sauces. The foods that have a lot of flavor. Avoid spicy or acidic foods. Again, I enjoy my spicy foods. Alcohol and caffeine can be an issue since they're known to cause GI issues for some people. Guess my energy drinks, those kinds of things. I'm an energy drink person. I do not like coffee. So hopefully you're not going to turn off the podcast now that you find out I am not a coffee drinker. But and then, of course, you have the blogs and other content out there that go even further into what to do and not do. One thing that's important in all of these recommendations is that they also include the caveat of some people. And it's really easy to look past that. And I found myself looking past that initially too, as I was reading through some of these recommendations. It's like you read the recommendation and then it says for some people, but you sort of block out the for some people and just hear, oh, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, cut this out, don't do this, that kind of thing. But it's important that we keep that in there, that some people part, because for some people, this can cause digestive issues, these different things that I was talking about there. But for some people, eating, smaller meals helps. And that's an important thing to keep in mind here as I move forward. And so I do need to keep those things in mind. But, the first few days after surgery, I was actually a bit fearful of eating because, as I pointed out, I kind of was reading the things not to eat and to avoid and leaving out the some people part. I mean, I knew I needed to take it easy, as is the case after any procedure, really, but especially in the case of having an organ removed that's part of the digestive process, because if you're not familiar with the gallbladder, specifically what it does is it collects the bile that's produced by the liver and it concentrates it, and this bile is used to help break down fats that we ingest. And so it's an important part of the process. So while we don't need our gallbladder to live a perfectly normal life, it's certainly darn helpful in digesting and breaking down fats. And especially when you have high fat meals or a high amount of fat in your diet, then it can come into play there. And now with it gone, basically that bile just sort of drips into the small intestine there. And so while there is still bile available, it's not released at the appropriate time based on the amount of fat that I'm ingesting at one time. So that little mechanism is no longer there. And so my body will probably struggle to digest fats in the same way that it did, prior to having my gallbladder removed. But I was going over all the things I need to avoid or be careful of in my head until I reminded myself, dude, all of these recommendations are things to keep in mind. Be mindful, but remember, some people just have issues and some people don't. Just like with any food or ways of eating, my body is going to respond differently than someone else. I may be able to tolerate more fried food than another person, or maybe less. I may not be able to tolerate any fried food. I don't know yet. So this is where my confidence and strength as an intuitive eater really eased those fears, because I was genuinely fearful. In fact, I almost did a podcast. This podcast episode was almost on sharing some of my fears of eating going forward, because the first few days after surgery, I was actually afraid to eat. And I wasn't eating very much. I was afraid that it was going to cause digestive issues. And, what can I eat other than chicken noodle soup and crackers and these things that have no fat? And so, I even went back. I was looking at food labels just to remind myself, how much fat does this have in it? Oh, I saw a recommendation that you shouldn't have more than 5 grams at a meal, or whatever it was. And so I thought, okay, well, that's going to bring me to 10. So I started getting back sort of in that dieting mentality, where I was looking at these numbers and sort of freaking out about the details without saying, hey, you know what? I can figure this stuff out through trial and error instead of over exaggerating or overreacting to these various recommendations out there. And so it's kind of funny, because once I got past that initial fear response, I'm actually looking forward to the process of learning how my body is going to respond to different foods and amounts of foods. And now that probably sounds really strange to a lot of you. Sounds kind of strange to me when I say it out loud, but it's kind of like the experience I had this last year when I had shoulder surgery and 9 months of rehab before I was even allowed to go back to doing any heavy lifting or strenuous activity. I really enjoyed the rehab process. And it's because I went into that process not with the mindset that, oh, I can't do all these things, and oh, this sucks. I can't do ninja anymore. I can't lift weights at the gym. I have to take it easy. I went into it saying, hey, I get to start from ground zero and build my body back up to a place where it is able to do all of these cool things that I've always enjoyed doing. And so I went into it with a very different mindset, and that different mindset really helped me through the rehab process to stay engaged in that process. I didn't really need motivation, like, okay, I've got to suck it up and do this or that, even though I don't want to. I was thoroughly enjoying the process of watching my range of motion get better and feeling the pain decrease. And when I got to a point where my shoulder actually felt better than it did prior to surgery, then I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then as all of the different things, seeing what my body could do and how it was capable of healing, and watching it do all these new things that I couldn't do that prior week. I remember seeing my strength increase, going from like assisted pull-ups at the gym with 100 pounds of assistance, to where the thing just basically moved almost automatically, to gradually getting to where it was only 50 pounds of assistance, and then gradually getting to where I was able to do my very first full body, first full body weight unassisted pull-up. And then when I was able to finally hit my goal after, a few weeks, a few months, to where I was able to do 10 full body weight pull-ups before going back to ninja. So I'd set these goals for myself like that, where I said, before I go back to ninja, I want to make sure my body is strong enough to tolerate those kinds of movements and activities. And so I think if I can do 10 pull-ups, then that's a good sign that my body has hit a point where it's ready to start doing some of these other activities, like swinging from bars and jumping and grabbing things in midair and that kind of thing. So anyway, I'm looking forward to getting back to that mindset with this, to getting to know my new body in a sense. And intuitive eating is really the perfect framework to have in place to make that exploration and discovery really enjoyable and beneficial. So I know I will I'm going to need to watch my intake of certain things, especially during these early stages. I thought I'd share a few things that I plan to do, and some I've already started doing, and maybe that will be helpful for you if you're going through something like this too. One that I'll definitely need to do is make different choices at some restaurants, not necessarily all restaurants or every time. It may be based on what I eat over the course of the day prior to it and that kind of thing. But as I'm thinking through this, especially early on, I know I don't think the chicken stuffed deep fried avocado, which is one of my favorite dishes at a particular restaurant, is going to be the best choice. It's this avocado. It's amazing. It's breaded and literally deep fried. So not only is it a relatively high amount of fat in the avocado, of course, it's a healthy kind of a fat and everything, but it's deep fried. And so that's probably not going to be ideal, not having a gallbladder. Another favorite is a chimichanga, which is a deep fried burrito. I guess there's a theme here. I do enjoy certain fried foods, but I'm going to have to be more mindful of that. I may not be able to order the thing that might sound really good in the moment, but that's okay. And in one sense, it can be kind of similar to the restriction that we experience when we diet. Ordering the low fat, low calorie, low carb, low flavor, boring, however you want to talk about, whatever kind of meal. But it's coming from a completely different perspective and a different place now. It's very different than when it was coming from a place with a diet mentality. It's all about intention here. Any restriction, whether it be the type of food or the amount of food in a single sitting, which I have limited myself to some since I've had my surgery, will be out of a place of self-care and not deprivation. And that's a whole different way of looking at it. Our mindset matters so much, how we're thinking about our body and the food that we eat. And the place that those thoughts are coming from makes a huge difference when it comes to our relationship with food, our body image, and our relationship with our body. It'll be a result of listening to my body, not trying to change the composition of my body. That's the important difference here. While it may look the same on the outside in a lot of ways, it's really completely different on the inside. Completely different psychologically and mentally, emotionally. It's all about that mindset. And the same principle would apply for a number of medical issues, maybe something that you're struggling with yourself, like things that come to mind are IBS, Crohn's, diabetes, cancer, allergies, food intolerances, those kinds of things. Sometimes you limit or restrict out of self-care, and because your body is telling you something and you're listening to those signals. And that's all part of intuitive eating, and why establishing a solid foundation of the intuitive eating principles can be so incredibly helpful in navigating these inevitable challenges that most of us, if not all of us, are going to face at some point in our life, unless, of course, we die really young or something like that. So I haven't been to a restaurant yet, but I did have a couple of opportunities to do some experimentation this week. I'm sure my doctor would be rolling his eyes and maybe even wagging a finger here, but you know what? I'm just learning what's going to work for me now, and I just wanted to get started. So let me share a couple of these things, and you might roll your eyes at this too, but I had Girl Scout cookies in the pantry, and I love them. And I had them sitting up there, and I'd been enjoying them for about a week up until my gallbladder surgery. And I'd have some at different meals, or maybe a snack and here and there. And the peanut butter patty ones, or tag along. I can't remember what they're called now. They keep changing the names on it, but it's basically the one that's like a Reese's peanut butter cup with a cookie in the middle of it. Amazing, delicious. But I thought, you know what? These are up there. They sound really good, but I know that I need to be really careful with this. So this has some of the markings of some of those foods that I need to watch my intake of, as we're going through this process. And so I thought, I'm going to have one and see how I feel. So I had one with one of my meals, and it was delicious. Loved it. And not quite satisfying enough just having one. But you know what? If that was all I could tolerate, then I would learn to be satisfied with that because of how my body would feel afterward. But in any case, the one worked out fine. Next time I tried to have some, I had a couple, and that worked out fine. And then I tried 3 or 4, I can't remember, at one time. And that was really plenty satisfying for me anyway. But I was sort of in this experimentation process, and I found that I did feel a little bit of discomfort, not bad, but I was like, yeah, if I'd had more, that probably would have been a problem. Or if I'd had those along with maybe a higher fat meal, that might have been a problem. So I'm going through and thinking through this stuff completely non-judgmentally, just curious, just like, I wonder what will happen if, and then making note of the responses of my body. And that's really the way that we should be approaching a lot of this process of working on these principles of intuitive eating. It's really about that curiosity. The other one was pizza. You may be saying, you ate pizza? Oh, less than a week after surgery? Yes, I did. Now, here's the thing. So my wife and our adult daughter who lives with us, they were wanting pizza. They were in the mood for pizza. And it sounded good, but I honestly was a little fearful of that even then, even after kind of working through that initial stage where I was having some of those fears. And I thought, you know what? This might be a good time to give it a whirl. Let's see what happens. So what I did was I told my wife, we don't need to order what we used to order. I'm not going to be eating much. I said, I'm going to be eating 2 small pieces at most. I'd already decided going in that would be my level of experimentation. So what I did was we just ordered a couple of mediums, and I had a slice of a medium pizza, and it was one of the smaller slices, and it did have sausage on it. It was actually very tasty. And I ate that piece of pizza, and I gave it a few minutes to kind of settle in, see how I was feeling. I felt good. And so then I had a piece of my wife likes the pizza with everything on it. It had all kinds of vegetables and everything on it. And it was thin crust. And so the way they cut them is into these little squares. So it was a little square, probably, maybe 3.5 inches square. And so I had one of those pieces, also very delicious again, actually quite satisfying between those 2 pieces of pizza. Let that settle in, enjoyed the flavor, felt good afterward, and didn't really have any issues. And so now I know probably if I ate another piece, I might have run into a problem. I guess we'll probably find out at some point, because I'm sure at some point I'll eat a third piece. But this was a great experiment to say, you know what? I don't have to be so fearful of this now. And while on paper, pizza is not something that's probably ideal for someone without a gallbladder, what I found out is that 3 cookies works okay. A couple of pieces of pizza works okay. And now I'm learning different things about my body. My body, your body may not tolerate that. You might have your gallbladder out, eat those 2 pieces of pizza, and find yourself with explosive diarrhea and throwing up over the toilet. I don't know. But for me, it worked. And so we'll see what happens. I'm not trying any fried foods anytime soon, but at some point I'll probably try something, maybe a few pieces of fried shrimp or, something along those lines, and just kind of see what happens as I get a feel for it. But my whole point in that was to give you an example of how I use my skills and my framework of intuitive eating to navigate this new way that my body is going to be responding to the food that I eat in a way that is out of curiosity and discovery, and not out of fear or restriction or avoidance. Now, will I restrict certain foods? I'm sure I'll have to. But it'll come from that place of, is it worth it to have explosive diarrhea and a massive stomach ache to eat this food? There might be a time where I say, yeah, actually it is. I don't know. But in general, I'll probably say, no, that's probably not worth the outcome is not worth it. And so, but that's very different than restricting for the purpose of shrinking my body, or restricting for the purpose where I think something is something I should avoid. I'll go into this process now knowing what I should avoid and what I need to be careful of. And I'm sure I'm going to discover certain foods that don't work well for me through that process. But in any case, I think I beat that particular point to death. But it's all about that, figuring out what's going to work for you. And this applies to just general intuitive eating as a whole. So not only if you have a medical issue or a medical condition, but even just as you navigate different foods and how your individual body feels, it's important to listen to your body, your cues. And as you go through the process of becoming an intuitive eater, you really do learn to connect to those signals more. You start to recognize them much more quickly. You start to be less judgmental about yourself, and you're able to make these decisions and discoveries from a place of genuine just curiosity and moral neutrality when it comes to the food that you eat. So that's it for this episode. I hope you found that helpful if you're currently going through something similar, or when you go through some kind of health challenge that may impact your body and how it functions, and how what you eat and how and what you eat are going to impact your body, that kind of thing. Now, lastly, before I wrap up here, I have a resource that might be just what you need to establish a framework for really caring for your body, both nutritionally and as it relates to physical activity. And maybe as I've talked through this particular issue, you thought, man, I would love to be able to approach my relationship with food from that perspective. I'd love to be able to look at the things that I eat in a way that doesn't bring up that self-hatred, that self-judgment, that sense of restriction. And so my brand new course called Equipped to Thrive is now live and ready for enrollment. So I'm really excited about that. It's a 13-lesson self-paced video-based course that takes you through all the principles of intuitive eating. And each lesson provides practical insight as well as additional resources, activities, supplemental content, all of those things to help you implement it and put what you're learning into practice. So it's not just teaching you about intuitive eating, but helping you to learn to become an intuitive eater. Now, for the guys, I'm also opening up my new Equipped to Thrive men's community, where you can get daily support from myself and other community members on your intuitive eating journey. And the community is available as part of the course or as a standalone membership if you don't take the course. And in the community, you'll get daily posts from me, but you'll also be able to post your own questions, struggles, successes, as well as kind of follow along with others doing the same thing that you are, These groups can be so helpful as you see how you're not alone in this, while also getting insight from others who've navigated similar kinds of situations. Community members will also get weekly group Zoom coaching calls with me to talk through various challenges. And I'm going to have a couple of different times set up each week to make sure that regardless of the time zone or kind of how your schedule is, hopefully you'll find a time that works for you. And of course, they'll be recorded so you can watch them back later as well. It's a private community, so all that stuff is going to remain within the community and within those community members. And since it's brand new, the community is not particularly big, obviously. But what that means for you is that you may show up for a group coaching call and be the only one there, which means you get a nice little one-to-one session with me for no extra cost. So it's kind of a little perk for being an early member in the group. So for more information and to get the course and or membership in the men's community, just head over to hopedrivesme.com and look for the Equipped to Thrive course on the front page. One more thing about this community is that it's not a Facebook group. It works kind of like a Facebook group, very much the same feel, the same look, but it's hosted on my own platform. So you don't need a social media account. You don't need to dust off your Facebook account. You don't need to spend time on social media. Don't need to put up with the advertisements that pop up or the distractions that come up often from doing that. So you'll be able to enjoy this nice social community with other men who are on the same journey as you are without all the downsides of social media. So I'm really excited to be able to provide that as a special perk for this particular group. And so, all right, enough of the advertisement. Until next time, remember that how you eat is far more important than the specifics of what you eat.